One is the good old-fashioned kind of anti-Semitism that we all grew up with. Bad graffiti, Jews go back to Israel, swastikas, cemetery desecrations, and I say tongue-in-cheek, good old-fashioned anti-Semitism, but it's the kind that we know about. It's the kind that's easy to see. Religious groups calling us Christ killers. I go to a conference here in Washington, and there's protesters outside with signs that say, Jews eat their children. The good old-fashioned anti-Semitism is alive and well and rearing its head in many, many places. The second kind of the six is Holocaust denial. I think the most famous of that, of course, is Ahmadinejad, the leader of a huge country that's about to get the nuclear bomb, impossible to dismiss as a crazy. Remember, 1933, Mein Kampf beat the Bible as the bestseller in Germany. You can't dismiss crazy people, particularly when they have a plan. But Holocaust denial is coming up in other less dramatic places than Ahmadinejad. We're seeing it in many countries where they're doubting, where there's studies and investigations about what really happened. It shows itself in ways that try and diminish the numbers. Oh, you say 250,000 were killed here? I don't believe it. Give me their names. You know, that kind of thing. And it's very troublesome. Germany has made it a crime to deny the Holocaust happened. Again, that's not how we do things, but it's helpful for us to see where it's happening and how connected are they. A third category is the opposite of that, and that is Holocaust glorification. Let me describe a video I saw recently of a January television show that showed on Egyptian television and on Al Jazeera. That means a lot. Millions of people saw it. Looking at the camera is a cleric, and it's all translated. We have a wonderful organization that helps us translate. Looking at the camera is the cleric. Behind him is a screen on it is showing actual footage of the concentration camps. We are all too aware of those pictures. Pictures of people throwing dead bodies into pits, people standing in line, getting ready to go to the gas chambers. And the cleric looks at the camera and he says, "Isn't this fabulous? Isn't this wonderful what happened? The total humiliation of the Jewish people. Allah willing, we will be able to be the perpetrators next time." Chilling beyond words. So we've got the good old-fashioned, we've got Holocaust denial, we've got Holocaust glorification, and there's another thing regarding the Holocaust that's out there. And that is a move to make equivalent the Holocaust and Soviet oppression. Now let me be clear. The countries who were occupied under the Soviets experienced horrors, absolute horrors, torture, oppression that we thankfully have not experienced in this country and never will. I do not want to in any way say that what happened to people who were victims of Soviet oppression were not victims. They're profoundly victims of acts of horror. However, to pass government declarations that ask and demand that there is an equation, that there's a conflating of the horrors of communism with the horrors of Nazism, is to rewrite history. It is, in some ways, to deny exactly what Nazism was. which was an organized attempt to single out a people to exterminate them from the face of the earth. And frankly, the countries who were part of the former Soviet Union have to accept that part of their history. They have to learn their complicity and what was going on in their country. If you go to Babi Yar in Ukraine, one of the more famous mass graves, it's, in 2 days, 100,000 people were killed, one at a time. This was not being shipped off to concentration camps. This was one person at a time, entire families lined up. 100,000 in 2 days means a lot of people participated in that. And you go there, and there would be no acknowledgement that over 70% of those bodies were Jews. There would also be no acknowledgement that the people pulling the triggers were Ukrainians. This has to change. You can't move on in history to the 21st century into their new identity, and believe me, they're going through an identity crisis, without knowing where you came from and what all the good and the bad and the ugly and the pretty and everything meant. And that's something that's very important in addressing and combating and monitoring anti-Semitism in what's going on. So the old-fashioned, the denial, the glorification, and the equating of the Holocaust, downgrading the Holocaust and equating it with different kinds of pogroms. There are two other that I want to mention. One is anti-other, hating immigrants, hating people that look different. I could put that in the good old-fashioned line, but there's a new fervor to it, as there are huge bulges in immigrant numbers around particularly Europe. And this is not a continent that is well known for integrating new populations. And they're experiencing huge streams of immigrants, and it's not going well. And it's not going well. We know about it in Poland. We know about it in Germany. We know about it in France. Did you know about it in Sweden? Norway? It's pretty widespread, and Jews don't do well when that happens. And the sixth area of anti-Semitism that we have to understand is something that I know you have discussed and you scratch your head about a lot. And that is when anti-Israel crosses over into anti-Semitism. I have to answer that question several times a day at the State Department. And the way I answer it is this. Well, first I say George Mitchell is the special envoy in Middle East peace, not me. I do anti-Semitism, but there isn't a bright line. Legitimate criticism of a policy or a government of Israel is legitimate. Illegitimate criticism is illegitimate. When does that happen? Natan Sharansky defines it as the 3 Ds. 1, when Israel is demonized, equated with Nazism, called an apartheid nation, where they're demonized, they're labeled as the vile of the earth. Second is when Israel is delegitimized, doesn't have a right to exist. We see that happening all the time. You just need to pick up your newspapers. And the third is when Israel's held to a different standard, or a double standard. To give you an example of what I said about the United Nations, in the last 5 years, of the resolutions that were passed by the United Nations that name a country specific, to condemn them, to use negative language about them, 170 of them were about Israel. 5 of them were about Sudan. So that gives you an idea of different standards. Those 6 categories are alive and well, and each have different kinds of challenges.